Hello there. So I wanted to explore the notion that how you pay attention to the small details, specifically how you pay attention to your alignment, can really change the whole outcome of an exercise. So particularly, let's look at coming into quadruped or hands and knees. And the reason this is interesting and important is because depending on, we might not be actually achieving what we are intending to achieve if we're not paying attention to the details. So this is why that's important. So a common position that we end up in many exercise classes, but this is also a beautiful place to be to strengthen your body in many ways towards natural movement, is the ability to be on hands and knees or hands and feet. But you can do this in many different ways. I want to just take a look at my body position here. So this is one thing that tends to happen, and maybe you can see what's going on in my lower back, my rib cage, my shoulders, maybe my neck. Another variation that we tend to see is this rounding in the lower back. Now, a common exercise is, you see this in yoga a lot, is cat-cow, where you get both of those positions in alternation, which is fine. You want to be able to move your spine in all these different ways. But I want to then start to pick this apart and make this a different motion, because one thing that might be happening is that certain parts of you might be kind of fused and stuck together, and even though we're trying to move the whole spine, you might not actually be getting much motion. So the first thing, in cat-cow, this thrusting forward of the ribs back and forth is not actually creating much change, or any change, if you will, in the upper spine. I might be doing this with my neck, but still, that's not creating a lot of change in your upper spine. And so take a look at this again when I'm on hands and knees. Now, if I have, I'm going to try to emphasize a little bit, a lot of rounding, hyperkyphosis in my upper spine, being on all fours can be a position that can help correct that over time. However, if I have a lot of this kyphosis, the first thing to notice is this pulling up here to put my arms on the floor, because I have this upper spine rounding, might cause a tuck of my pelvis, which rounds the lower back, creates that flexion in the lower spine, which I might not be intending. And this also creates tighter hip flexors and may not be the most healthy position for the lower spine to be in. Now, another thing that might happen if I try to release my lower back, but I have that rounding in my spine, so I'm going to try to release my lower back towards the floor, tilting my pelvis forward. Because of this kyphosis in my upper back still, I'm actually starting to put compression. So the tendency might be here, but as I try to relax the lower back, I'm pulling those ribs down and forward, and that can put some compression into your lower back. So the first thing I want to do to help correct this is to change the angle of my spine. So notice how my arms are just naturally, of course, longer than my thighs. So my spine is tilted at an angle here. That helps. That's one of the things that also causes that lower back compression. I'm going to take a couple blocks. You can use anything to elevate just a few inches off the floor. You can use books or pillows, and bring your knees up onto it. Now, voila, I've gotten my hips more or less, at least closer to the height of my shoulders. Now, here's the exercise I want to play with. Instead of doing this full cat-cow, which couples the tilt of the pelvis with the thrust and tuck of the ribs, I'm going to see if I can relax my lower back and now isolate just the tilt of the pelvis. See if you can only tilt your pelvis back and forth without letting the ribs lift up and down. Can you see the difference there? So just tilt your pelvis anteriorly and posteriorly a few times. Tuck and untuck. Then tilt the pelvis a little bit forward, which is actually a little more neutral to the ground. So your tailbone and butt is reaching upward. That puts the natural sway back into your lower back. And then hold that there and try to isolate now the motion of just the lower ribs. I'm going to feel like I'm pulling my lower ribs up into my belly or up towards the spine. And then I'm letting the lower ribs drop towards the floor. And I'm just going to do this lift and lower of the lower ribs and trying to keep my lower back and my pelvis as still as possible. A mirror is a really good tool to use here. It's good to watch yourself. Okay, and then third, I'm just lining up the spine from bottom to top. Tailbone is up. Now I'm going to bring my ribs back into neutral, which does expose some of my kyphosis. Now I'm going to move my shoulder blades. So one might collapse your shoulders to the ground. You see that a lot in all fours. Instead, I'm going to do this rhomboid push-up. I'm going to push my body away from the floor to spread out the shoulder blades. So you can see how my shoulders collapse versus being way up here. Tailbone up, ribs up, shoulder blades wide, chest away from the floor. And now finally, pay attention to your head. So my head can either be here, which is constricting the back of my neck, or I might be here, hanging my head towards the floor. Try to start in this position with your head hanging down and ramp your head up. So think your ears pulling to the ceiling, but keep your face towards the floor. And you might try that one a couple times. Head down, head up, but I'm not looking forward. I'm just still looking towards the floor. Okay, so now I'm lining up the whole spine, tailbone, ribs, shoulder blades, ramping the head, and the final portion, just to think about really getting length and stretch of the whole spine, is just more thought than anything, is to think of the top of the head reaching forward as your tailbone is reaching back. So top of the head forward, tailbone back, and when you're in that aligned position, you get this traction to start to lengthen the whole whole spine, but particularly the upper spine as well. Nice. And so just kind of check out the difference there between either collapsing, hanging your head down, back, or maybe my back is rounded this way. Both of those are just putting compression in places we don't need them and want them. So tailbone up, ribs up. If you don't have a block, chest up, head ramped. Now if you don't have a block for your knees, lift your knees up, becomes a little bit harder. And think of the length in your spine, tail to head. Good, it's not a lot of motion to play with right now, but it's a lot of, it actually is pretty intense. So keep playing with that, and I'll see you next time.